And so we settle in. You can feel your body beginning to grow heavy in the most pleasant way. In our time together tonight, there is nothing to examine, nothing to understand, only the gentle rhythm of a story, the story of whispers in a Roman palace of power, and of a reputation so scandalous it would echo for 2,000 years. Before we drift too far, if you feel a connection to this place, you're welcome to leave a quiet like or subscribe. Think of it not as a task, but as leaving a soft footprint in the sand before you continue your journey inward. And if you feel so inclined, you might leave a quiet comment below, letting me know what city you're listening from, and what time it is in your corner of the world. It's a nice way to feel a quiet connection, knowing we are all settling down for the night together. And so, find that gentle darkness in your room, perhaps with a soft blanket pulled a little closer, as we begin our slow drift into tonight's tale. The first thing you notice is the cold. It seeps up from the floor, through the thin leather of your sandals. You're standing in a vast, echoing hallway on the Palatine Hill, inside the Imperial Palace of Rome. The year is somewhere around 45 AD. The air smells of beeswax, cedar smoke from a distant brazier, and a faint, almost metallic scent you can't quite place, maybe the smell of power itself, or just old marble. It's probably just old marble. This isn't a warm and fuzzy kind of place. It's a place of suffocating silence between echoing footsteps. Every shadow seems to hold a secret, and every gilded corner seems to have witnessed something it's not supposed to talk about. Power here is a currency traded in whispers, and you, my friend, have just arrived. You'd probably survive the first day. Maybe. Just try not to make eye contact with anyone holding a scroll too tightly. They're the ones with the list. You are in the heart of the Roman Empire, the nerve center of the known world. And it is terrifyingly quiet. The walls are covered in frescoes of mythological scenes, gods doing very ungodly things, nymphs running away from suspiciously cheerful-looking satyrs. But the real mythology is being written right here, in these corridors. Lining the walls, you see them. The Praetorian Guard. They are less like men and more like living statues of polished bronze and scarlet wool. They don't blink. Their job is to protect the emperor. But as everyone in Rome knows, they're also the ones who make the emperors. It was these very men, in their intimidating gear, who found the current emperor, Claudius, hiding behind a curtain and, in a moment of baffling battlefield promotion, declared him the ruler of the world. It's one of history's great examples of phoning upwards. You walk past a doorway, catching a glimpse of an impossibly long dining room. This is where the emperor holds his banquets. And while we've all heard tales of Roman excess, here's a little detail they don't always mention. You've probably heard the word vomit, or IUM, and imagined a special room for guests to, make space for the next course of roasted peacock. The truth is that's a popular myth. A vomit, or IUM, was actually just an entrance or exit in a large stadium, designed to spew forth crowds of people. However, historians still quietly debate just how much purging actually happened at private palace feasts. While there was a dedicated room with a sign on the door, the practice of induced vomiting to prolong a feast was very real for the super elite. It's a detail that's both disgusting and, in a strange way, deeply practical. The Romans were nothing if not efficient, even in their gluttony. You continue your silent journey, your footsteps muffled by a long runner rug that a slave is meticulously brushing clean, even as you walk on it. The sheer scale of the palace is disorienting. Historians and archaeologists still argue about the exact layout of the sprawling complex. The Domus Tiberianae. Was this next room a private dining chamber, or a hall for receiving nervous senators? Was that courtyard meant for quiet reflection, or for the empress's children to play in? Each generation of scholars draws up new maps, new theories, trying to piece together the daily life that filled these now empty spaces. But it's not the building you're here for. It's the whispers. You pause near a heavy curtain, pretending to admire a mosaic of a rather unhappy-looking octopus. From the other side, you hear the low murmur of voices, to senators, by the sound of their formal speech. They aren't talking about politics, or grain shipments from Egypt, or the new aqueduct. They're talking about the imperial family, about the strange, limping, stuttering scholar who is now their emperor, and about his wife. To be precise, she is young, decades younger than her husband. She is, by all accounts, breathtakingly beautiful. And she is, the whispers say, utterly, dangerously bored. And it's her name, more than anyone else's, that hangs in the air tonight. The name is Messalina. The whispers of the senators fade as you move past the heavy tapestry. You find yourself in a much smaller, warmer room, a study. Unlike the cold, performative grandeur of the hallways, this space feels lived in. Stacks of papyrus scrolls lean against each other like tired old friends. Half-finished maps are held down by polished rocks. And the air smells of ink and old paper, a scent both dusty and sharp. This is a room for thinking, not for ruling. And there, hunched over a large wooden desk, is the most powerful man in the world. He doesn't look it. This is Tiberius Claudius Caesar Augustus Germanicus, Emperor of Rome. Or, as his own family used to call him behind his back, that stammering clumsy OAF. You see him now, lost in his work, a man in his mid-50s with thinning hair and a slight tremor in his hands. He dips a reed pen into an inkpot, and you notice his fingers are stained dark. He mutters to himself, a low, academic rumble. He is tracing a line on a historical text, his brow furrowed in concentration. This is the man who survived the reigns of Augustus, Tiberius, and the notoriously unhinged Caligula, largely because no one ever considered him a threat. He was the family joke, the scholar with a limp and dust utter who was trotted out for minor ceremonies and then quickly hidden away again. He wasn't a soldier. He wasn't a charismatic speaker. He was a historian, a man who preferred the company of dusty, Etruscan chronicles to living, breathing people. Then one day, the Praetorian Guard finally had enough of his nephew Caligula, an emperor who tried to make his horse a consul, which is usually a sign that things are going off the rails. They assassinated Caligula in a flurry of chaotic violence. And in the terrifying aftermath, a group of soldiers found Claudius, hiding behind a palace curtain, shaking with fear, fully expecting to be next. Instead, in a moment that historians still debate with a sort of fascinated disbelief, they hoisted him onto their shoulders and declared him emperor. He went from being a historical footnote to the author of history itself, all because he chose a good hiding spot. He looks up and his eyes, which are surprisingly clear and intelligent, fall on you. There's a moment of shared panic. You are an intruder in his private space. But he doesn't shout for the guards. There's no flash of imperial rage. Instead, he looks weary, like a professor who has been interrupted one too many times by a student. You glance down at his desk, and this is where you see a peculiar detail that reveals the man behind the title. Among the scrolls of history and military reports, there is a wax tablet inscribed with the familiar Latin alphabet, but with 3 new, entirely unfamiliar letters added. This was one of Claudius' pet projects. As emperor, he actually tried to introduce new letters to the alphabet, a reversed C for one sound, a half H for another. They were called the Claudian letters. It was an act of supreme scholarly geekiness. He had ultimate power, the ability to raise armies and condemn senators to their doom, and he chose to spend his political capital on grammatical reform. The letters, of course, did not catch on and were forgotten almost immediately after his death. And as you look at this strange, awkward man, this walking contradiction, you can't help but wonder about the great debate that still surrounds him in our own time. Was he truly the bumbling fool that ancient historians like Suetonius and Tacitus made him out to be, a man ruled by his wives and his powerful ex-slave advisors? Or was that all an act, a brilliant, lifelong performance of harmless incompetence that allowed him to survive one of the most dangerous families in human history? Was he just a puppet, or was he the most skilled puppeteer of them all, playing the long game while everyone else underestimated him? The truth is, we will never know for sure. The historical sources are biased, written by senators who resented being ruled by someone they considered their inferior. Claudius sighs, a sound that seems to carry the weight of the entire empire, and turns back to his scrolls, seemingly forgetting you are even there. You back away slowly, leaving the scholar emperor to his books. He may be the absolute ruler of Rome, but his attention is clearly elsewhere, lost in the past. And that, you realize, creates a vacuum, a space of inattention right at the very center of power, and vacuums, as everyone in this palace knows, are made to be filled. As you slip back out into the marble corridor, you hear a new sound approaching, not the shuffling step of an old scholar, but a light, quick, confident footstep. The sound of someone young, someone who is not content to live in the shadows of the past. You press yourself into an alcove, the cold marble a stark contrast to the sudden warmth that seems to fill the corridor. The footsteps grow closer, accompanied by the faint, almost musical rustle of fine silk and the subtle clinking of gold jewelry. And then, she rounds the corner, and you understand why the senators were whispering. This is Valeria Messalina. She is young, perhaps not even 20 years old yet, but she carries herself with an assurance that makes age irrelevant. The historians tell us she was beautiful, but that's a flat, unhelpful word. What you see is something more potent than mere beauty. It's a kind of crackling, restless energy contained within a perfectly composed exterior. She has the kind of face that artists would despair of capturing, not because it is too perfect, but because its expression seems to change with every flicker of the torchlight. Her hair is a complex masterpiece of curls and braids, a style that would have taken a team of skilled slave women hours to create. Tiny pearls are woven into it, catching the light. Her stole, the traditional garment of a Roman matron, is the color of saffron, a shockingly expensive dye that screams wealth and status. It's cinched just below her breasts with a golden belt fashioned like intertwined snakes. Everything about her is deliberate, a carefully constructed image of imperial dignity and aristocratic grace. She is walking with two ladies in waiting, who scurry to keep pace with her brisk, impatient stride. She is speaking to them in a low, animated voice, and though you can't make out the words, you can hear the tone. It's not the languid, thoughtful cadence of her husband. It's sharp, quick, and punctuated by a short, dismissive laugh. She is not discussing history or grammar. As she passes your hiding spot, her eyes large and dark, framed by carefully applied kohl, flicker in your direction for a fraction of a second. It's not a real glance. It's the kind of sweeping, automatic gaze that royalty uses to survey a room, acknowledging everything and seeing nothing. Yet, for that brief moment, you feel pinned, assessed, and instantly dismissed. There is a formidable intelligence in that glance, and a profound, almost unnerving self-possession. This is a woman who understands her value. She is a great-grand-niece of the divine Augustus himself, a direct descendant of the most powerful bloodline in Rome. Her marriage to Claudius, decades her senior, was a political masterstroke. It cemented his shaky claim to the throne by linking him directly to the revered Julian dynasty. She has given him two children, a daughter, Octavia, and a son, Britannicus, the heir. On paper, she is the perfect Roman empress, fertile, beautiful, and impeccably pedigreed. But as you look at her, you see something else flicker beneath the polished surface, a glint of something sharpened and tamed. And here you stumble upon a curious, and rather humanizing, little detail about Roman high society. Messalina, for all her apparent divine ancestry, likely had a nickname. Not an official title, but a diminutive, personal name used by her family. We don't know for sure what hers was, but it was common practice. The fearsome Empress Livia was known as Livilla, Little Livia. The mighty Agrippina the Elder was Agrit Penila. It's a strange thought that this formidable creature of ambition and scandal might have been called Messalina by her mother. It's a reminder that even the monsters of history were once just children. The debate among historians about Messalina is fierce and has raged for centuries. Was she the insatiable, depraved monster that the ancient sources, all written by men of the senatorial class who despised her influence, portray her to be? Or was she a shrewd politic operator, a woman who used the only weapons available to her in a male-dominated world, her charm, her body, her connections, to build her own power base and secure her son's future? Was her notorious behavior a sign of uncontrollable lust, or a series of calculated political acts designed to create alliances and eliminate rivals? The ancient writers give us a caricature, a one-dimensional villainess. The truth, as always, is likely buried somewhere in the complicated, inaccessible middle. She and her entourage sweep past, the scent a heady mix of rose water and expensive oils lingering in the air long after they've gone. The silence they leave behind feels different, heavier. The quiet of Claudius's study was a peaceful, scholarly quiet. This is the quiet of a held breath, the silence before a storm. You have now seen the two poles of power in this palace. The aging, inward-looking emperor, lost in his books, and the young, vibrant empress, radiating a restless energy that this cold marble place seems unable to contain. It's an imbalance that cannot possibly hold. Something you sense is about to break. Days turn into weeks. The rhythm of the palace settles into a predictable, suffocating routine, and you begin to understand the source of that restless energy you saw in the Empress. Life here, for a woman of Messalina's station, is a performance, an endless series of rigidly choreographed rituals acted out on a stage of polished marble. You see her in the morning presiding over the salute aetier, the formal greeting ceremony. Dressed in immaculate white, she sits on a chair slightly smaller than the emperor's, a living symbol of wifely devotion and imperial stability. Senators and important clients of the imperial family file past, bowing low, their faces masks of practiced reverence. Messalina's smile, this perfect, serene, and utterly vacant. Her eyes, you notice, are not falling men before her. They seem to be looking right through them, at the gilded ceiling, at the patterns in the mosaic floor, at anything other than the tedious reality of the moment. Later, you see her in the imperial nursery. She plays with her children, Britannicus and Octavia, under the watchful eye of a dozen nurses and tutors. She holds her son, the heir to the world, and kisses his forehead. The gestures are from a maternal virtue, the pieties that every citizen was expected to revere. But again you see a flicker of something else. A distraction. A tension in the way she holds her shoulders. She is playing a role, and she is playing it brilliantly, but it's clear the costume is beginning to itch. This gilded cage, for all its luxury, is still a cage. Her movements are restricted. Her companions are chosen for her. Every word she speaks is noted. Every friendship analyzed for its political implications. She is the most powerful woman in the world, and yet she cannot walk down to the forum to shop for a new bracelet without a full Praetorian escort and the gossip of 1,000 onlookers. It's during one of these stifling afternoons that you witness a small, telling incident. Messalina is in a walled garden within the palace complex. Fountains tinkle, birds sing in ornamental cages, and the air is heavy with the scent of jasmine. It should be a scene of perfect tranquility, but Messalina is pacing, back and forth along a gravel path, her silk slippers crunching with an agitated rhythm. A lady in waiting approaches, holding a silver tray with a cup of chilled wine. Messalina stops, takes the cup, and then in a gesture of sudden, shocking frustration, she hurls it against the garden wall, where it shatters with a sharp crack. The wine, dark as blood, runs down the white plaster. The lady in waiting freezes, terrified. Messalina doesn't even look at her. She just stares at the stain for a long moment, her chest rising and falling, before turning on her heel and stalking back inside, leaving a trail of stunned silence. Here's a peculiar detail of Roman elite life that adds another layer to her confinement. The homes of the powerful, the domus, were not private sanctuaries in the way we think of them. They were semi-public spaces. The front part of the house was constantly filled with clients, messengers, and political allies. There was no real concept of getting away from it all. For someone like Messalina, the palace was both her home and her prison, and it was always full of people watching her every move. The only true privacy was a state of mind, and hers was clearly fraying. The great historical debate here is not about if Messalina was reckless, but why was her eventual explosion into scandalous behavior the result of this suffocating boredom, a desperate cry for authentic experience in a life of endless artifice? Or was it something colder and more calculated? Some historians argue that her actions were not driven by emotion at all, but by a pragmatic and ruthless ambition. They suggest she saw Claudius as a weak, temporary placeholder and was systematically building her own network of loyalists, using affairs and intrigue to place her allies in positions of power, all in preparation for the day She could rule as regent for her young son, Britannicus. Was she a thrill-seeker or a master strategist? A victim of her gilded cage or its secret architect? As night falls on the palace, the atmosphere changes. The formal duties of the day are done. The senators and clients are gone. Claudius, as you know, has likely retired to his study or fallen asleep over a plate of sow's udder at a long, tedious dinner. The palace grows quiet, but it's a different kind of quiet now. It's a quiet filled with possibility, with the sense of rules being relaxed under the cover of darkness. The torches in the hallways cast long dancing shadows that seem to beckon, and you get the feeling that the Empress's day, the one she truly wants to live, is only just beginning. The cage door is about to swing open. The transformation begins subtly. You watch from the shadows of a long colonnade as the formal empress of the daytime recedes, replaced by someone else entirely. The elaborate hairstyle is gone, taken down and replaced by a simple, dark wig, the kind a common merchant's wife might wear. The saffron-colored stole is shed like a second skin, cast aside onto a marble bench. In its place she dons a tunic, a plain, coarse-spun garment of a drab, unassuming color. The pearls and golden snakes are gone, locked away in a heavy wooden chest. She's aided by a single slave woman, one whose face you've never seen in the official daytime court. This woman moves with a quiet, conspiratorial efficiency, her eyes constantly darting towards the hallway entrance. There is a practiced silence to their movements. This is a ritual they have performed many times before. The Empress Messalina is being erased, and a new identity is being meticulously constructed in her place. She turns, checking her reflection in a polished silver mirror held by the slave. The face that looks back is still hers, of course, but it's stripped of all its imperial context. Without the jewels and the elaborate hair, without the aura of power she wears like a cloak, she looks younger, harder, and somehow more alive. A spark of genuine, dangerous excitement has replaced the bored emptiness in her eyes. This is not a woman going to a secret political meeting. This is a woman preparing for an escape. She slips a few coins into a small leather pouch tied at her waist. Not gold or stamped with her husband's face, but common bronze sesterces, the currency of the streets. She pulls a dark hooded cloak over her shoulders, the final piece of her disguise. She is no longer Valeria Messalina, Empress of Rome. She is just a woman of the city, anonymous and invisible, ready to be swallowed by the night. This is where you encounter a fascinating and often overlooked aspect of Roman life, the city after dark. For the elite, the night was a time of private, lamplit dinner parties within the safety of their homes. For everyone else, the streets of Rome were a dangerous and chaotic place. There was no official street lighting. The city plunged into an almost absolute darkness, broken only by the occasional torch of a wealthy person's entourage or the dim light spilling from a tavern doorway. It was a world of deep shadows, of uncertain footing on uneven cobblestones, a place where muggings work common and the city watch was largely ineffective. For the Empress of Rome to voluntarily enter this world was an act of supreme, almost unthinkable recklessness. Her slave leads her not towards the grand, guarded entrances of the palace, but down a narrow, winding staircase you never knew existed. It's a service passage, steep and musty, the kind used by slaves to move unseen through the imperial residence. The air grows damper, colder. The smooth marble gives way to rough-hewn stone. You are descending into the foundations of the palace, into its hidden infrastructure. They emerge into a small, neglected courtyard. A single, gnarled olive tree grows in the center. In the wall, almost completely hidden by overgrown ivy, is a small, heavy wooden door. A postern gate. The slave produces a large iron key, and with a low groan of protesting metal, the lock turns. Historians still debate the plausibility of these clandestine excursions. Could the Empress, the most recognizable woman in the empire, truly slip out of the heavily guarded palace unnoticed? Some argue that the stories were wild exaggerations, slander cooked up by her enemies after her fall to make her seem as depraved as possible. Others suggest a more complex reality. Perhaps her escapes weren't entirely secret. It's possible she had accomplices within the Praetorian Guard itself, men she had bribed or seduced into looking the other way. Power, after all, can buy silence and complicity. The idea of a secret network of enablers, from the slave woman with the key to the guard who deliberately turns his back at the right moment, makes the story feel chillingly more believable. Messalina pulls the hood low over her face, obscuring her features in shadow. She exchanges a quick, silent nod with her loyal slave, who locks the gate from the inside the moment she slips through. And then she is gone. You are left standing in the dark courtyard, the sound of the locking bolt echoing in the sudden silence. The Empress has left the building. She has shared her identity and plunged into the anonymity of the Roman night. And you, drawn by an irresistible curiosity, follow her out into the darkness, down the slope of the Palatine Hill, towards the distant, chaotic glow of the city below. Leading the manicured slopes of the Palatine Hill is like stepping from one world into another. The air changes instantly. The delicate scents of jasmine and beeswax are gone, replaced by a thick, earthy cocktail of smells, wood smoke, cheap wine, frying food, unwashed bodies, and the ever-present, acrid stench of the overflowing sewer system. Welcome to the sub-URA. This is the real Rome, the sprawling, chaotic, beating heart of the city, nestled in the valley between the grand hills. By day it's a deafening riot of noise, the hammering of blacksmiths, the shouts of vendors, the rumbling of cartwheels on stone. By night it's a different kind of loud, a more human and more dangerous kind. You follow the hooded figure of the Empress as she plunges into the labyrinth of narrow, winding streets. The buildings here are not made of marble. They are towering, rickety apartment blocks, called in Seoul, built of cheap timber and mud brick, leaning against each other for support like tired drunkards. They rise 5, 6, sometimes 7 stories high, blotting out the stars and creating a canyon of man-made darkness. Fire is a constant, terrifying threat here. One overturned oil lamp could turn an entire city block into an inferno in minutes. Messalina moves with a surprising confidence, her steps quick and sure-footed on the uneven, garbage-strewn cobblestones. She is no stranger to this place. She navigates the maze of alleys and backstreets with the ease of a local, turning left at a fountain stained with grime, right at a tavern from which spills the sound of raucous laughter and the crash of a dropped tankard. This is a world away from the silent, spacious corridors of the palace. Here, you are pressed on all sides by the raw, unfiltered energy of a million lives. You pass a baker's shop, still glowing with the heat of its ovens, the smell of warm bread, a brief, delicious respite. You sidestep a group of drunken legionaries, off duty and spoiling for a fight. A woman leans from a 4th-story window, shouting an insult at someone in the street below, her voice echoing off the grimy wall. You duck as a cascade of something wet and unpleasant is unceremoniously dumped from a window high above. This was a daily reality of Roman urban life, giving rise to the rather niche profession of the stercoraeus, the dumb collector, who would clean the streets for a fee. It also led to specific laws about being hit by falling waste, with established fines for property damage or personal injury. It's a wonderfully weird historical detail that the Roman legal system had specific clauses for dealing with the consequences of someone emptying their chamber pot onto your head. As Messalina leads you deeper into this nocturnal world, you can't help but ponder the central academic question her story raises about Roman society, the stark division between public image and private reality. The official ideology, the one spouted by emperors and poets, was all about Morsmayer on the ways of the ancestors. It emphasized duty, piety, modesty, and family. Yet, here in the sub-URA, another, more visceral reality thrives. This is a world of public gambling was technically illegal, a fast food bars called Thermopylae serving hot wine and cheap sausages, or 1,000 transactions, both legal and illicit, happening under the cloak of darkness. Which was the real Rome? The austere, marble-clad ideal, or this messy, vibrant, dangerous reality? Historians continue to argue that they were two sides of the same coin. A society that publicly preached virtue while privately indulging in every imaginable vice. Messalina seems not just comfortable here, she seems to draw energy from the chaos. The bored, listless Empress of the Garden is gone. The woman striding through the sub-URA is alert, her senses sharp, her body alive with purpose. She has shed the suffocating weight of her public identity and become anonymous. Here, she is not the wife of Claudius, the mother of Britannicus, the descendant of Augustus. She is just a shadow among shadows, a face in the crowd. This loss of identity is not a punishment. It is the ultimate freedom. She finally stops before a heavy wooden door, distinguished from the others on the street only by the faint, reddish glow of an oil lamp hanging above it, its flame sputtering in the night breeze. There is no sign, no indication of what lies within. But a large, bald man with the scarred face of a former gladiator stands beside the entrance, his arms crossed over his massive chest. He watches Messalina approach, his eyes narrowed. She murmurs a single word to him, a name, unbolts the door, and pulls it open just wide enough for her to slip inside. The door slams shut behind her, leaving you once again on the outside, listening to the muffled sounds of music and laughter from within. She has arrived at her destination. The bouncer gives you a long, hard stare, the kind that silently asks if you want to spend the rest of the night nursing your teeth. But you are just a shadow, a passive observer. He dismisses you, turning his attention back to the street. A moment later, a stumbling patron is ejected from the establishment, landing in a heap on the cobblestones. The door opens for a fraction of a second, and you seize the opportunity, slipping inside before it slams shut again. The change in atmosphere is immediate and overwhelming. You are in a Roman Lupa NARI brothel. But it's not the squalid, desperate place you might have imagined. It's loud, crowded, and surprisingly organized. The main room is a kind of tavern, filled with small wooden tables. Men of all sorts are here: merchants, soldiers, sailors fresh off the ships at Ostia, their faces weathered by the sun and sea. They are drinking, dicing, and laughing, their voices a constant, rumbling hum beneath the high-pitched music of a flute player in the corner. The air is thick with the smoke from oil lamps, the smell of spilled wine, and a heavy, cloying perfume that does a poor job of masking the scent of sweat. The walls are painted with vibrant and very explicit frescoes. These weren't just for decoration, they were a kind of visual menu advertising the various services on offer. It's a jarring combination of art and commerce, a testament to the Roman ability to be both artistically sophisticated and incredibly direct. You scan the room for Messalina, but she is nowhere to be seen. The women working here move between the tables, their tunics dyed in bright, garish colors. Roman law, in a peculiar bit of social engineering, required prostitutes to be registered and to wear specific clothing, often brightly colored garments, and even blonde wigs to distinguish them from the respectable matrons in their modest white stalwarts. It was a visual system of social control, a way to label and contain a part of society that was both officially condemned and widely tolerated. Then you see her, Chess, emerging from a small doorway at the back, a doorway that leads to the private cells. The cell her disguise is gone. The drab tunic and dark wig had been replaced. Now she wears a thin, almost transparent silk garment of a shocking, fiery red. On her head is a bright, garishly blonde wig, the mandated uniform of her chosen profession for the night. And she has a new name here. The bouncer called her by it when she entered. Lysiska, a common name for prostitutes, evoking the she-wolf who suckled Romulus and Remus, a strange, almost mythical link between the foundation of Rome and this sordid underworld. She isn't acting like a newcomer. She moves through the room with a proprietary air, a queen in her own strange, inverted court. She laughs with the flute player, shares a joke with the tavern keeper, and trades a shot with one of the other working women. She belongs here. Or rather, she has made herself belong. This is the scene that so shocked and horrified the Roman historians who recorded her story. The sheer transgression of it, the Empress of Rome, the living symbol of imperial purity and dignity, willingly, enthusiastically, taking on the role of the most debased and marginalized figure in their society. It wasn't just a secret affair for pleasure, it wasn't just a secret affair for pleasure. And here a fascinating debate continues to simmer among modern historians. Was the story as recorded by Pliny the Elder and Tacitus even true? It seems too perfectly scandalous, too neatly fitting into the narrative of a bad empress. Some scholars argue it was a complete fabrication, a piece of political character assassination designed to posthumously destroy her reputation and justify her execution. They argue that the logistics of it are simply impossible, but others contend that while the details may have been exaggerated for dramatic effect, the core of the story might hold a kernel of truth. They point to the Roman elite's known fascination with the low life, a kind of thrill-seeking tourism in the city's underbelly. For someone as stifled and rebellious as Messalina, could such a double life have been the ultimate act of defiance? The ultimate escape from the gilded cage? You watch as Lysa Scott takes a seat in a specially prepared alcove, a space slightly more ornate than the others. It has a velvet cushion and her own personal jug of wine. She is not just another worker here. She holds a special status. She is a spectacle. Men stare at her, whispering among themselves. They might know she is the Empress, but they know she is the Empress, but they know she is the Empress, but they know she is someone different, someone who brings a strange, aristocratic glamour to this sordid place. Her eyes glittering in the lamplight. She is performing just as she did in the palace, but this is a role she has chosen for herself, and in this small, grimy corner of the subura, she seems, for the first time, truly and terrifyingly free. Just as Messalina, or rather Lysa Scott, settles into her strange throne, a ripple of anticipation moves through the room. The usual boisterous noise dips for a moment. Heads turn towards the main entrance. The heavy door swings open, and the bouncer steps aside with a rare show of deference. A woman enters, and you know instantly that this is not just another worker. This is Scylla. If Lysa Scott is the visiting queen of this domain, Scylla is its resident goddess. She is older than Messalina, perhaps in her late 20s or early 30s, which in her profession is a lifetime. Where Messalina's energy is a sharp, crackling fire, Scylla's is a deep, slow-burning ember. She isn't classically beautiful in the aristocratic way Messalina is. Her face is stronger, her features bolder, and her eyes hold a kind of weary, knowing intelligence that no pampered empress could ever possess. She has seen everything the Roman knight has to offer, and she has survived it all. She is a legend in the subura. Her name is whispered in taverns and legionary barracks from Britannia to Syria. She is the undisputed champion of her trade, a woman whose skill and stamina are spoken of with a kind of awestruck reverence. She doesn't need a blonde wig or a garishly colored tunic. Her fame is her uniform. She wears a simple, dark blue stole, a deliberate endowment, a deliberate and ironic appropriation of the respectable matron's garment, a subtle mockery of the women who live on the hill above. She moves through the room not with the performative swagger of Lysa Scott, but with the quiet, unshakable confidence of someone who owns the ground she walks on. The other women greet her with a mixture of respect and envy. The men watch her with a different kind of desire, not just lust, but the ambition to say they have been with the best, with the famous Scylla. And here's a fascinating and often grim detail about her profession. For many women in ancient Rome, this was not a choice. They were often slaves, captured in foreign wars or born into servitude, forced into this life by their masters. Others were abandoned infants, raised in the brothels, or free women driven by desperate poverty. To rise to a position of fame and relative autonomy rare, she would have been an exceptional businesswoman, managing her own earnings, a portion of which always went to the brothel keeper, the Leno, cultivating a clientele, and building a reputation that set her far above the anonymous women in the cells. She was, in her own way, as much a master of her world as Messalina was of hers. Scylla's gaze sweeps the room and lands on Lysa Scott. There is no warmth in her eyes, only a cool, professional assessment. This newcomer, this aristocratic thrill-seeker who plays at being a prostitute, is a challenge to her authority, a disruption to the established order of her world. You see a flicker of a smile on Lysa Scott's face, a deliberate, provocative curl of the lips. The Empress is enjoying this. It's a new kind of power game, played by different rules, and she is determined to win. The academic debate here is a subtle but important one. Did a figure like Scylla truly exist, or was she a literary invention, a character created by the historian Pliny the Elder to serve as the perfect dramatic foil for Messalina. The story of their contest, after all, reads like a scene from a play. Pliny, who is our primary source for this particular tale, was a naturalist and an encyclopedist, a man who collected facts and stories about everything from botany to geography. He often included sensational anecdotes and bits of gossip alongside his more scientific observations. So was Scylla a real flesh and blood woman, a famous courtesan whose name was known throughout the city? Or was she a narrative device, a symbol of the professional plebeian against whom the amateur aristocrat could test her mettle? We have no other source that mentions her, which leads many historians to suspect she is more of a literary ghost than a historical person. Real or not, in this moment, she is a powerful presence. She walks over to the bar and pours herself a cup of wine, her back to Lysiska. A gesture of deliberate disregard. The tension in the room is suddenly thick enough to taste. The regular patrons sense it. They fall quiet, their eyes darting between the two women. The flute player's music falters. This isn't just a personal rivalry. It's a clash of worlds. The Palatine Hill has descended into the sub-URA, and the established hierarchy of the night is about to be challenged. Something is about to be proposed. A contest. A wager so outrageous, so unthinkable, that it will become a legend. And everyone in the room leans in, waiting for the first word to be spoken. The silence in the room stretches, becoming heavy and charged. It's Lysiska Messalina who finally breaks it. Her voice, though not loud, cuts through the low murmur of the tavern with the clarity of a silver bell. The famous Scylla, she says, her tone a perfect blend of mock admiration and barely concealed condescension. They say your reputation is unmatched in all of Rome. Scylla turns slowly, taking a deliberate sip of her wine before answering. Her eyes are flat, unimpressed. Reputations are earned, Lysiska, not borrowed for a night's entertainment. The jab is clear. You are a tourist here. I am the reality. A ripple of nervous laughter spreads through the onlookers. This is better than any drunken brawl or cockfight. This is a duel of words of status, fought on the grimy floor of a sub-URA brothel. Messalina's smile doesn't falter. She leans forward, her eyes glittering with a feverish intensity, an admirable sentiment she purrs. So let's put these earned reputations to a true test. A contest, to see who is truly the most dedicated to her craft. Scylla raises an eyebrow. A contest. What are you proposing? Who can pour wine with the most grace? Who can tell the most amusing lie? The room is now utterly silent. Every man is frozen, cup halfway to his lips, dice forgotten in his hand. They are all witnesses, and they know it. Something a little more strenuous, Messalina says, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper that everyone can still hear. A test of endurance, from dusk until dawn. One night, we count our patrons. The one who can welcome the most men by the time the sun rises, wins. A collective, sharp intake of breath sweeps through the room. This is not just a challenge, it is an act of madness. It pushes past the boundaries of even this world's jaded sensibilities. It's a wager of almost mythical, Herculean depravity. Scylla stares at Messalina, her expression unreadable. For the first time, you see a flicker of something in her eyes, not shock, but a kind of weary disbelief. She has seen the depths of human behavior, but this is new. This is the decadent, pointless, theatrical absurdity of the aristocracy brought down into her world of grim survival. This moment, as described by Pliny the Elder, is one of the most infamous anecdotes in all of Roman history. His account in Natural History is brief and presented as a statement of fact. Messalina, the wife of Claudius Caesar, chose to enter the lists in a grand contest of this nature with a common prostitute, and actually outdid her. He frames it as an example of extreme, almost unbelievable libidinousness, and this brings us to a crucial and quite bizarre detail of Roman thinking. While the idea of the empress doing this was scandalous, the concept of an endurance contest itself wasn't entirely alien. The Romans were obsessed with spectacles, competitions, and record-keeping. They loved to count, to quantify, to declare a winner. They had gladiatorial contests, chariot races that ran for days, and drinking competitions. In a strange, perverse way, Messalina's proposal taps into this fundamental aspect of the Roman psyche, the desire to turn everything, even the most intimate and sordid of acts, into a competitive spectacle with a clear victor. It's a dark reflection of the same impulse that built the Colosseum. The great historical debate here is one of interpretation. If we assume the story has a grain of truth, what was Messalina's motivation? Was it, as Pliny suggests, simply the result of an unconquerable lust? Or was it something more complex? Some modern interpretations view it as a pathological act of self-degradation, a symptom of deep psychological distress. Others see it as the ultimate power play. This was a domain where she could not only compete but dominate. By beating the most famous professional at her own game, she was, in a twisted way, asserting her own inherent superiority. The aristocrat, even in the gutter, must prove she is better than the commoner. It's an assertion of class dominance in the most debased arena imaginable. Sylla finally speaks, her voice low and even. And the prize for this, victory. Messalina laughs, a short, sharp sound devoid of any real humor. The prize is knowing. The prize is the story. Isn't that enough? She is not doing this for money. She is not doing it for any tangible gain. She is doing it for the sheer, transgressive glory of it, for the reputation it will earn her in this shadow world that has become her obsession. Sylla looks around the room at the stunned, eager faces of the men who will be the tally marks in this grim competition. Then she looks back at the Empress in her prostitute's disguise. She gives a slow, deliberate nod. "Fine," she says, "you have your contest." A roar of excitement erupts from the crowd. Wagers are instantly being shouted, odds offered. The tavern keeper starts pouring wine with a renewed vigor. The stage has been set. The unthinkable wager has been accepted. The night is about to descend into a fever dream of mythic proportions. The brothel, which moments ago was just a dingy tavern, now transforms into something else. It becomes the arena for this strange, unprecedented contest. The energy shifts from idle vice to the focused, electric hum of a sporting event. The Leonard, the brothel keeper, a man with the shrewd, calculating eyes of a bookie, sees the commercial opportunity instantly. He starts directing his staff with a new sense of purpose. Two of the small, curtained cells at the back of the establishment are cleared. These are not luxurious spaces. A Roman brothel's cell was typically a tiny, windowless room, barely large enough for a stone or wooden bed platform with a simple mattress stuffed with straw or wool. They were functional, anonymous, and designed for quick transactions. But tonight, a small distinction is made. Sylla is given her usual cell, a space she has likely occupied for years. It's familiar territory. Messalina is shown to the one directly opposite. A small, three-legged stool is placed outside each doorway. On each stool, the Leno places a simple abacus, the Roman counting to love beads on a wire frame. This will be the official scoreboard. He also places a jug of water and a bowl of olives and coarse bread beside each stool sustenance for the long night ahead. You watch as the two competitors make their final preparations. Sylla's are minimal. She braids her dark hair back, a practical gesture. She speaks in a low voice to one of the other women, who nods and hands her a small vial of scented oil. It's the routine of a professional preparing for a long and difficult shift. There is no ceremony, only a quiet, grim focus. Messalina's preparation is more of a performance. She stands in the center of the main room, allowing the patrons to see her. She adjusts the blonde wig, fluffing it with her fingers. She takes a long, slow drink of wine, her eyes scanning the crowd over the rim of the cup, a silent challenge to them all. She is not just a participant, she is the main event, the instigator, the star of the show she has created. This is a good moment to consider a peculiar Roman custom that adds a layer of strangeness to this scene, the titulus in some brothels. Each cell would have a small plaque, or titulus on the door, listing the name of the woman who worked there and her price. Sometimes it would even list a particular specialty. It was a stark, commercial detail that reduced a person to a set of advertised services. While Pliny doesn't mention this detail, you can easily imagine it, each with a name above it, the Cylla, Lycisca. It frames the contest with a chilling sense of formality. The rules are laid out by the Leno, his voice booming over the excited chatter of the crowd. The contest will begin when the first Claudius water clock is set. It will end when the last one runs out at dawn. A designated counter, one of the bouncer's assistants, will be responsible for marking each patron on the abacus. No disputes. The historical debate that surfaces here is about the audience. Who were these men who witnessed and participated in this legendary contest? Pliny the Elder is silent on the matter, giving us only the core details of the challenge between the two women. Were they just the usual mix of low-life sailors and merchants found in the subura, or did word of this bizarre event spread, drawing in a more elite, slumming clientele? Some scholars have speculated that members of Messalina's own aristocratic circle, the young, dissolute nobles she surrounded herself with, may have been present. This would change the dynamic entirely. It would mean she wasn't just performing for strangers. She was performing for her own social class, in the secret theater of debauchery, cementing her reputation as the most daring and reckless of them all. It becomes less an escape from her world and more a twisted extension of it. The crowd swells. Word has clearly spread through the Subura's nocturnal grapevine. More men are pushing their way in, eager to witness the legend being born. The air grows hotter, almost suffocating Lyso. The flute player begins to play a faster, more frantic tune, a driving, percussive rhythm that adds to the mounting tension. The Leno holds up a small, bronze water clock. It's a simple vessel with a tiny hole in the bottom, from which water will drip at a steady rate into a basin below. It is the official timepiece of the underworld. He looks at Lysa. She gives a sharp, eager nod. He looks at Scylla. She meets his gaze, her face a mask of stoic resolve, and nods once. With a theatrical flourish, the Leno pulls the plug from the bottom of the Claudius. A thin trickle of water begins to fall. Let the contest begin, he bellows, and with that the two women turn without another word and disappear into their respective cells, pulling the heavy curtains close behind them. The long night has begun. The first drop of water from the Claudius splashes into the basin below, the sound so faint it's completely lost in the roar of the crowd. The contest has begun, and the brothel, which had momentarily held its breath, erupts into a chaotic marketplace of desire and wages. You position yourself in a shadowy corner, a place from which you can observe the two doorways, the two abacuses that will tell the story of the night. The bouncer's assistant, a man with a notepad like Stabaton de Stylus, takes his position on a stool between the two cells. His face is bored, impassive. To him, this is just a job, albeit a strange one. A line forms almost instantly, or rather two lines. The men, fueled by wine and the bizarre spectacle of it all, begin to queue. It's a surreal sight, a grimly organized procession in the heart of chaos. They argue amongst themselves, some placing bets on which line will move faster, which champion will prove more efficient. The first man approaches Lysa's cell. H.E.S. a young, swaggering legionary, is off-duty tunic barely concealing a muscular frame. He exchanges a handful of coins with the counter, who makes a quick notation on his wax tablet and then, with a deliberate click, slides a single bead across the top wire of Lysa's abacus. The soldier grins, pulls back the curtain, and disappears inside. Moments later, a grizzled merchant with a salt and pepper beard steps up to Scylla's door. The transaction is repeated. Click. A second bead moves, this time on Scylla's abacus. The score is 1-1. The rhythm of the night is established in these first few minutes. It's a relentless mechanical cycle. Amen approaches, money is exchanged. A bead is moved on the abacus. A curtain is opened and closed. There is no glamour here, no seduction. The contest has stripped the act of all its trappings, reducing it to a pure, quantifiable unit of transaction. It is a grim piece of accounting. And it's in this accounting that we find a strange but telling detail about the Roman economy. The price for a prostitute in a place like this was surprisingly low. We have graffiti from Pompeii that lists prices, and they often equated to the cost of a loaf of bread or a cheap cup of wine. It was an accessible commodity. This fact adds a layer of bleak reality to the contest. The men lining up are not spending a fortune. This is a cheap form of entertainment, made extraordinary only by the high-stakes wager attached to it, for Messalina who could spend more on a single hairpin. The triviality of the sums involved must have been part of the transgressive thrill. As the first hour passes, you watch the abacusses. The beads slide across the wires with a steady, almost metronomic regularity. Lysis Scott bakes an early lead. 5-3, then 7-5. There is an eagerness, a novelty to her that draws the first wave of patrons. They want to be able to say they were with the mysterious newcomer, the one they call she-wolf. The debate among historians that ignites here is a deeply uncomfortable one, touching on the nature of consent and exploitation. Even if Messalina was a willing, even enthusiastic participant, what about the very real power dynamics at play? As the Empress, she held ultimate power, even in disguise. Could any of these men truly refuse her? Was their participation entirely free, or was there an unspoken element of command in the air? Conversely, for Scylla, this was her livelihood. Was her participation in this degrading spectacle of free choice? Or was she coerced by the pressure of the moment, by the demands of the brothel keeper, by the need to defend her professional territory against this powerful interloper? The ancient sources, written from a male, aristocratic viewpoint, never ask these questions. They frame it simply as a story of female depravity. But a modern lens forces us to see the darker, more complex layers of power, class, and coercion that are undoubtedly at play. The curtain to Lysis' gas cell is thrown back, and the young soldier from the beginning stumbles out, a dazed, slightly bewildered look on his face. He doesn't linger. He pushes his way through the crowd and is gone. A moment later, a new customer takes his place. Click. Another bead slides across the wire. You look at Scylla's door. Her curtain remains closed. She is taking longer with each client. Her pace is slower, more deliberate. Is this a strategy? Is she relying on quality over quantity, hoping to build a base of satisfied, repeat customers as the night wears on? Or is Lysis' frantic pace simply impossible to match? The first water clock empties. The Leno loudly announces the end of the first watch and ceremoniously sets a new one. He calls out the score. Lysis got 12. Scylla 9. A cheer goes up from the men who bet on the newcomer. Messalina is in the lead. But the night is still young, and the true test of endurance is only just beginning. The second water clock begins its slow, steady drip. Outside the brothel's thick wooden door, the city of Rome is changing. The last of the respectable citizens have bolted their doors. The bakeries have gone dark. The only sounds in the streets are the distant shouts of a drunken patrol and the scuttling of rats in the gutters. The deep, true night has fallen. Inside, however, the atmosphere is reaching the fever pitch. The room is now packed, a sweaty, noisy mass of humanity. More lamps have been lit, casting a thick, greasy, yellow light over the scene and making the air even hotter and more suffocating. The initial novelty of the contest has worn off, replaced by a more grim, focused spectating. The crowd is less a collection of individuals and more a single, hydra-headed creature, its many eyes fixed on the two closed curtains. You watch the abacusses, the silent storytellers of this ordeal. Lysis' pace continues to be relentless. Click, 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 click. The beads on her side of the ledger move with a furious energy. She is a whirlwind, a force of nature. Each transaction is brutally efficient. A man enters, the curtain closes, and what feels like a stunned expression. He is disgorged back into the main room, often with a slightly stunned expression, as if he has just stepped off a spinning carnival ride. Scylla's rhythm remains slower, more measured. Click, a pause, click, a pause, click. Her lead may be slipping, but there's a steadiness to her work, a professional calmness that stands in stark contrast to Lysis' frantic pace. It is during this period, in the deep middle of the night, that you might notice a curious detail about Roman timekeeping. Our modern obsession with the precise 60-minute hour did not exist. The Roman hour, the horror, was a flexible unit of daylight into 12 equal hours, and the period of darkness into 12 equal hours. This meant that a daylight hour in the summer was much longer than a daylight hour in the winter, like the ones dripping away in the cleft deer now was a fluid, imprecise thing. The contest isn't being measured in minutes and seconds, but in these organic, elastic stretches of darkness. It's a competition against a natural, rather than a mechanical clock. The crowd grows more raucous. Arguments break out over wages. A wine jug is knocked over, the dark liquid spreading across the dirty floor like a pool of blood. The flute player, his face slick with sweat, is now playing a wild, almost hypnotic tune, a relentless, driving beat that seems to fuel the room's manic energy. Lysiska's curtain is thrown back. For a brief moment, you see her. She is standing in the doorway of her cell, her blonde wig slightly askew, a faint sheen of perspiration on her brow. She grabs a clay cup of water from the stool, downs it in one go, and then catches the eye of the next man in her line. A feral grin spreads across her face. It is a look of pure, unadulterated defiance, of someone pushing themselves to the absolute limit and finding a strange, exhilarating power in it. She beckons the man forward with a flick of her fingers and disappears back into the darkness of her cell. Click. Another bead is added to her score. The historical question that hangs over this part of the night is a practical one. How was this physically possible? The numbers recorded by Pliny the Elder are staggering, almost certainly the product of legendary exaggeration. He claims Messalina won with a score of 250. It's a number that defies belief and enters the realm of mythology. Historians still debate what this number could possibly represent. Was it a wild invention? Or was the definition of a patron in this context something different? Perhaps a much briefer, more symbolic transaction than we imagine. Could it have been a contest of numbers in a more abstract sense? The sheer impossibility of the figure forces us to question the literal truth of the entire story and see it instead as a moral fable about excess, a cautionary tale whose details were deliberately inflated to shock the reader. You glance over at Scylla's door. There is no such theatrical display. The curtain remains drawn. The only sign of the ordeal is the slow, steady accumulation of beads on her abacus. She is like a long-distance runner, pacing herself, conserving her energy, while Lysiska is a sprinter, burning through her reserves in a furious, unsustainable burst. The second water clock empties. The Leno shouts the score, his voice hoarse. Lysiska 31. Scylla 23. The gap has widened. The Empress is not just winning, she is dominating. A great cheer erupts from her supporters. But as you look at the two closed doors, you sense that the true battle, limitations, is about to begin. The sun is still hours from rising, and the relentless rhythm of the abacus continues its grim, clicking count. The third water clock is set, its first drop falling into the basin with a soft splash that seems, in the growing weariness of the room, unnaturally loud. The initial, frenzied excitement of the crowd has burned itself out, leaving behind a thick, sluggish atmosphere of grim voyeurism. The men are no longer cheering loudly, they watch now with a kind of quiet, clinical fascination, like spectators of a gladiatorial match. This is the point in any contest of endurance where the body begins to betray the mind. The muscles scream, the nerves fray, and the initial rush of adrenaline is a distant memory. Now, it is no longer a physical competition. It has become a battle of pure, unyielding will. You watch Lysiska's door. The curtain is flung back, and she appears for a moment, reaching for her water jug. Her face, beneath the cheap makeup and the sweat, is pale. The manic, glittering energy in her eyes has been replaced by something harder, more brittle. A kind of defiant fury. She is no longer drawing energy from the crowd. She is feeding on something within herself, her pride, her imperial arrogance, her absolute refusal to be beaten by a commoner. This is a twisted reflection of a core Roman ideal. Virtus for a Roman man. Virtus was a combination of valor, excellence, and courage, proven on the battlefield or in the political arena. It was the defining quality as a dark feminine, and deeply perverse form of it. Messalina is demonstrating an almost supernatural endurance, a will to conquer that is as strong as any general's. She has turned the brothel into her battlefield, And each client is another soldier overcome, another mark in her campaign of carnal warfare. She is fighting for a victory that no one else in the world would possibly want, but for her, it is everything. Then you notice a strange and cruel new element to the contest. The men emerging from her cell are starting to talk, to boast. One slaps his friend on the back and says, "She's beginning to tire. But she couldn't break me." This is a peculiar insight into the Roman male ego, something we see hints of in surviving graffiti from places like Pompeii, where men would scrawl crude reviews or boastful tallies of their own exploits. The clients have become part of the psychological war. They are no longer just passive participants, they are now adversaries, obstacles to be overcome. Their own pride pitted against hers. Every sign of her fatigue is a victory for them. The academic controversy that this moment highlights is the one that lies at the heart of Messalina's entire story. Was she a calculating strategist or one in the throes of a profound mental breakdown? One school of thought argues that even the shaking hands, the pale face is part of a grand, consuming performance. She is pushing herself to this theatrical limit to prove her absolute dominance, to create a legend so powerful it will echo through the city. More modern psychological reading suggests we are watching a profound act of self-harm, a desperate attempt to feel something, anything, in a life of gilded numbness. Is this the ultimate power trip or the ultimate cry for help? Is she the director of this drama, or its most tragic victim? The ancient sources offer no such nuance, they simply label her a monster. You turn your attention to the other door, Scylla's cell. The curtain parts and she too emerges for water, but her demeanor is entirely different. Her face is a stoic mask. There is no fire, no fury, there is only a deep, profound weariness that she holds at bay with an iron control. Her movements are slow, deliberate, conserving every ounce of energy. Her will is not forged in the fires of imperial pride. It is the hardened, practical will of a survivor. For her, this is not a game. It is the defense of her livelihood, her reputation, her very identity in this world that she has mastered. To be beaten by this aristocratic tourist would be a professional humiliation she cannot afford. She is not fighting for a story. She is fighting for respect in the only world that respects her. She drinks her water, looks at no one, and retreats back into her cell. The curtain closes. A few moments later, the next man in her line goes in. Click. A bead moves on her abacus. The machine continues to work. The score is now 40-33 in Lysiska's favor. The gap on the abacus is still wide. But the gap in their reserves of will, in the very fuel that keeps them going, seems to be closing with every drip of the water clock. The night deepens, reaching that strange, silent hour just before the dawn, a time when the world feels old and exhausted. The energy in the brothel has completely transformed. The raucous betting and shouting have long since died down, replaced by a tense, almost reverent hush. The patrons who remain are no longer boisterous drunks, they are the dedicated few, the ones who want to see the end of this mythic ordeal. They speak in low murmurs, their voices swallowed by the thick, smoky air. You are no longer just an observer. You have become one of the witnesses, a keeper of the story. You drift through the quiet crowd, listening to the fragments of whispered conversation, the imagined commentary on this bizarre, historic event. Look at the abacus. A man with the calloused hands of a stonemason whispers to his friend, "The she-wolf is an animal, a goddess. I've never seen anything like it." His friend just shakes his head, his eyes wide with a kind of superstitious awe. Near the bar, the lino is having a quiet, intense conversation with the bouncer. "We'll be talking about this night for 50 years, the lino mutters, his eyes gleaming with the reflected light of the oil lamps. He is not just counting the profits of a single night, he is calculating the value of the legend itself. This brothel has become a historical landmark. This is where the Empress," he starts to say, then catches himself, glancing around nervously. The secret is not a secret, but it is a truth that must not be spoken aloud. This is a fascinating aspect of Roman society, the concept of public secrets. Everyone in a certain circle might know something, but there is a collective, unspoken agreement not to acknowledge it officially. The historian Tacitus, when writing about the scandals of the imperial court, often alludes to this phenomenon, describing how rumors and shocking truths would circulate widely in private but were met with a wall of public denial. The story of Lysiska is one such secret. Many in this room may suspect or even know her true identity, but to name her would be to break the spell, to cross a line from illicit entertainment into treason. You pass by a group of the other working women, huddled together in a corner, watching the proceedings with a complex mixture of expressions. There's envy, certainly, at the attention being lavished on the two competitors, but there is also a kind of professional, clinical respect. Scylla is pacing herself, one woman says, her voice slow and knowledgeable. She knows the pace Lysiska is setting is impossible. She's waiting for her to collapse. But the she-wolf doesn't collapse, another replies. She's not human. It is some kind of madness. A third woman, older and more cynical, just sips her watered-down wine. It is the madness of the rich, she says, her voice filled with a weary contempt. They can afford to break themselves for a story. We have to work again tomorrow. This observation cuts to the heart of a heated debate among social historians. How did the non-elite, the common people of Rome, truly view their rulers? The official art and poetry present an image of adoring reverence. But fragments of graffiti and the bitter writings of satirists like Juvenal suggest a much more cynical and resentful reality. The common people were often acutely aware of the hypocrisy and decadence of the ruling class. This contest for the women watching isn't an act of divine stamina. It's a grotesque display of privilege. Messalina can afford to treat this night as a game because her survival does not depend on it. For Scylla, and for every other woman in this room, survival is the only game there is. You look back at the two doors. The steady, grim rhythm continues. A man exits, another enters. Click, a beat moves. The process is hypnotic in its relentless repetition. You find yourself disassociating from the reality of it, seeing only the patterns, the flickering lamplight, the dark rectangle of the curtained doorways, the sliding beads on the abacus, the faces of the crowd, pale and drawn in the dying light of the lamps. The score whispered from person as the counter updates his tally is now 58 to 49. Lysiska's lead is holding, but the numbers feel increasingly meaningless. They are just marks on a scorecard. The real story is happening in the silence within those two small, dark rooms, a story of pain and pride and the slow, grinding erosion of the human will. And as the first hint of grey begins to soften the edges of the window shutters, you know that this long, strange night is finally lurching towards its conclusion. A sliver of pale, grey light forces its way through a grimy crack in the window shutter. It is the forced dawn, that cold, unforgiving moment when the night is over but the day has not yet begun. The light seems to suck the warmth and colour from the room, leaving everything looking tired, sordid, and cheap. The flickering orange of the oil lamps, which had seemed so vibrant just hours ago, now looks weak and pathetic against the encroaching daylight. This new light is cruel. It exposes everything. The stains on the floor, the weary lines etched on the faces of the remaining spectators, the grime under the fingernails of the counter, who is now fighting to stay awake, his head nodding periodically. The magic and madness of the night have evaporated, leaving behind a sticky, unpleasant residue. You look towards the two cells, and the harsh light reveals the true cost of the contest. The curtain to Lysiska's cell is partially open. You can see her, not in a blaze of defiant glory, but slumped on the edge of the hardbed platform. Her head is in her hands. The blonde wig is horribly askew, revealing strands of her own dark hair, matted with sweat. Her shoulders shake with a silent, racking tremor. This is not the Empress. This is not the triumphant she-wolf. This is a woman who has pushed her body and spirit to the very edge of collapse and has found nothing on the other side but a profound, hollow exhaustion. Here we confront a grim and often unmentioned aspect of ancient life, the sheer physical toll. We tend to imagine historical figures, especially royalty, as living in a state of pristine comfort. But their world was one without modern medicine, without an understanding of germs, without relief from chronic pain. For Messalina to subject herself to this ordeal was to invite exhaustion, disease, at a level of physical degradation that is hard for us to comprehend. The story is often told as a tale of moral decay. but it is also at its core a story of extreme physical suffering. The curtain to Tacitus' cell is also ajar. She is not slumped. She is standing, leaning against the cold stone wall, her eyes closed. Her face is a mask of pale, stoic endurance. But it is a mask that is cracking. You can see the dark circles under her eyes, the tension in her jaw. She is holding herself together through sheer, practiced discipline, but the effort is immense. She is a professional who has been pushed far beyond the limits of her profession, forced to compete in an event that has no rule, no sanity, and no precedent. The academic debate that this scene evokes is one of legacy and narrative. Why did this particular story, out of all the possible scandals and rumors of the imperial court, survive so vividly? Historians like Tacitus and Pliny were not just recording events, they were crafting moral narratives. The story of the contest was likely preserved as the perfect symbol of a rotten aristocracy. It was a story that said everything about the corruption and decay at the heart of the Claudian dynasty. It was a story that was, in essence, too good, too symbolically perfect, not to be true. Whether it happened exactly as told is almost secondary to the fact that it felt true to a Roman audience. It captured a perceived reality about their decadent rulers. The counter, jolted awake by a nudge from the bouncer, rubs his eyes and makes another mark on his wax tablet before sliding a final, weary bead across Lysis abacus. Click. The sound is flat, final. He looks at Tacitus' door. The last man in her line has long since gone. There is no one else. The room is silent. The contest is over. All that is left is the grim accounting. The learner walks over to the abacus, his face serious. He clears his throat, preparing to announce the final, official result of this long and brutal night. The false dawn holds its breath, waiting for the verdict. The Leno stands between the two abacuses, a self-appointed herald in this grimy arena. He holds up a hand for silence, a gesture of pure theater as the room is already deathly quiet. All eyes are on him, then on the two exhausted figures in their doorways. He points a thick finger first at Scylla's abacus. He doesn't count the beads aloud. He doesn't need to. The final tally has been whispered through the crowd for the last half hour. He lets the visual speak for itself. He then turns and points to Lysiska's abacus. The row of colored beads on her side is visibly, undeniably longer. There is no cheer, no roar of victory. The moment is too strange, too frightened with the weight of the grueling night for any simple celebration. It is Scylla who acts first. She pushes herself off the wall of her cell, her movements stiff and slow like an old woman's. She walks with a steady, deliberate pace into the center of the room. She does not look at the abacus. She already knows the result. Her gaze is fixed entirely on her rival. She stops a few feet from Messalina, who is still slumped on the edge of her bed, her face hidden in her hands. Scylla's voice, when she speaks, is not angry. It is not resentful. It is just tired, a voice scraped clean of all emotion. "You win, Lysiska," she says. The words hang in the silent, stay there. The victory is yours. It is a surrender, a quiet and utterly absolute concession of defeat. She, the undisputed queen of the sub-URA, has been dethroned by this aristocratic phantom. She has reached her limit, and in a contest where the only goal was to outlast the other, she has fallen short. This moment brings up a fascinating, if speculative, historical question. What happened to Scylla after this night? History, as written by the elites, does not care. She is a narrative device, a foil for the Empress, and her story ends here. And did she fade back into the anonymity of the sub-URA, her reputation shattered? Or did the legend of the contest, in a strange way, enhance her fame, making her the woman who almost beat the inhuman she-wolf? It's a question that exposes the brutal indifference of our historical sources. The lives of the common people, their triumphs and their humiliations, are almost always lost to us. They exist only as props in the grand dramas of their social superiors. Messalina looks up slowly. Her face is a wreck. Her eyes are bloodshot, her makeup smeared. But through the mask of utter exhaustion, a flicker of something else appears. A glint of triumph. A spark of the fierce, competitive pride that has driven her through the night. She has done it. She has proven her point. In this bizarre, self-created arena, she has demonstrated her innate superiority. She has beaten the professional at her own game. The descendant of Augustus has conquered the gutter. And here's a peculiar detail about Roman competitions that adds a final, formal touch to this scene. In many contests, from gladiatorial games to poetry slams, the loser would have to formally acknowledge the winner's victory, often with a specific phrase or gesture. Sylla's simple declaration is a reflection of this cultural norm. It is the verbal equivalent of a defeated gladiator raising a finger to the editor of the games. The academic debate that swirls around this moment of surrender is one of power and performance. Was Sylla's defeat a genuine physical and mental collapse, or was it a calculated business decision? Perhaps she recognized the madness in her opponent and understood that this was a contest she could not win, because Lysa's skull was not bound by the rules of reason or self-preservation. To continue would be to risk her own health, her ability to work tomorrow, for the sake of a pointless, unwinnable war. Her surrender in this light can be seen not as a failure of will, but as an act of profound, professional pragmatism. She chose survival over a victory that meant nothing. Messalina, who did not have to worry about survival, could afford the luxury of a meaningless victory. Sylla holds Messalina's gaze for a long moment. There is no animosity in her eyes, only a deep, bottomless weariness and perhaps a sliver of pity. She then turns without another word and walks back to her cell, pulling the curtain closed. She has removed herself from the stage. The final act belongs to the victor alone. With Sylla's retreat, all the remaining energy in the room seems to coalesce around the figure of the victor. Messalina slowly, painfully, pulls herself to her feet. She stands swaying slightly in the center of the room under the cold, unforgiving light of the dawn. But this is no triumphant moment on a chariot, no athlete being crowned with a laurel wreath. This is a victory that looks, to all intents and purposes, exactly like a defeat. She is a hollowed-out shell of a human being, a ghost in a garish costume. Her victory has been purchased at the cost of her own vitality, a night of her life burned away for the sake of a number on an abacus. The Leno approaches her, a cup of wine in his hand, the victor's tribute. He offers it with a bow that is a strange mix of genuine and sycophantic greed. To the new queen of the Subura, he says, his voice unctuous. Messalina takes the cup, her hand shaking so much that some of the wine sloshes over the rim. She doesn't drink. She just stares into the dark liquid, her expression vacant. The story, the glory, the sheer transgressive thrill she was chasing, she has caught it. And now, in the moment of its capture, it seems to have turned to ash in her hand. You are witnessing a profound and deeply Roman concept, the hollow triumph. The Romans were obsessed with victory, with the spectacle of the triumph, where a conquering general would parade through the city with his spoils and captives. But their literature is also full of a deep-seated anxiety about the emptiness that follows victory, the moment when the cheering stops and the conqueror is left alone with what he has done. Messalina has just won her own personal, sordid triumph, and the silence that follows is deafening. A small, strange detail from Roman culture comes to mind. During an official military triumph, a slave would stand behind the victorious general in his chariot, holding a laurel crown over his head, and whispering in his ear, "Memento mori, remember you are mortal." It was a reminder that even at the peak of glory, death and human frailty are inescapable. There is no slave whispering in Messalina's ear, but the grim reality of her own mortality is written on over her exhausted face. She has proven her stamina as godlike, but the cost has been a brutal reminder of the limits of her mortal flesh. The few remaining patrons begin to shuffle out, pulling their cloaks tight against the morning chill. They have seen what they came to see. The legend is complete. As they leave, they cast final, furtive glances at the Empress. Their faces a mixture of awe, disgust, and pity. They will tell this story for the rest of their lives, and with every telling, the details will grow more exaggerated, Messalina's stamina more supernatural, the night's events more depraved. They are the eyewitnesses who will cement the myth. The great historical debate that this moment crystallizes is about the very nature of historical truth. Our only source for this event, Pliny the Elder, simply states the outcome: Messalina won. He presents it as a fact, a piece of data to be recorded in his encyclopedia of the natural world, as if he were noting the migratory pattern of birds or the tensile strength of a particular wood. But what does winning an event like this even mean? What you are witnessing is a victory so absolute that it has become a form of self-annihilation. This raises a crucial question for historians: can we ever trust a source that gives us the facts without the human context? Pliny gives us the what, but he ignores the why, and, most importantly, the devastating cost. A more critical reading of history demands that we look past the simple dictionary and question the very meaning of the word. Messalina finally raises the cup to her lips and drains it in one desperate gulp. The wine seems to give her a flicker of her old fire. She straightens her back, pulling the tattered shreds of her dignity around her like a royal cloak. She throws the empty cup to the floor, where it shatters. She is the Empress again, if only in her own mind. She has won, and now she has to disappear to carry her hollow, weary victory back up the hill before the other, more dangerous world she inhabits wakes up and notices she is gone. The brothel is emptying, the departing patrons melting away into the grey anonymity of the Roman dawn. The Leno, his face a mask of satisfaction, he is already counting a thick stack of coins at the bar. For him, the legend is now a commodity. The story is good for business. Messalina stands alone in the center of the room for a moment, a strange, pathetic figure in her prostitute's costume. Then the side door opens, and the same loyal slave woman who helped her escape the palace slips into the room. Her face is etched with worry, but she says nothing, her expression a practiced blank. She carries a bundle of plain dark cloth. The transformation back begins. It is the reverse of the ritual you witnessed the night before, but this time it is slower, clumsier. Messalina's hands are shaking too much to undo the fastenings of her reed tunic. The slave has to help her, her movements quick and efficient, but also gentle, as if she were tending to a wounded soldier or a sick child. The garish blonde wig is removed, revealing Messalina's own dark hair, damp and tangled. The slave carefully sponges her face with a cool, damp cloth, wiping away the smeared coal and the grime of the night, washing away the last traces of Lysa's scar. With each gentle wipe, the she-wolf recedes, and the Empress, pale and fragile, begins to re-emerge. She is dressed once more in the drab, anonymous tunic and the dark, hooded cloak. The mask of the common woman is put back on, but it's a mask that no longer fits quite right. The woman underneath has been irrevocably altered by the ordeal. Here you encounter a fascinating and practical detail of Roman life: the public baths, or thermae for most Romans. Bathing was a daily social ritual. But the great bathhouses opened later in the day. In the early morning the city was still unwashed from the day before. Messalina is returning to the palace in a state of profound uncleanness, carrying the sense and sensations of the subua with her. Her first act upon returning, you imagine, would be to summon her bath attendants for a desperate, secret cleansing, a ritual scrubbing away of the night's transgressions before she had to face the formal world of the court. The slave woman guides her, a steadying hand on her elbow, towards a back exit, a different door from the one she entered. It leads into a narrow, choked with overflowing refuse bins. The air is cold and sharp. Messalina leans against the rough brick wall, taking a deep, shuddering breath of the clean morning air, as if coming up from underwater. The journey back up the hill is a slow, painful shadow of the eager descent. Each step on the steep, winding path seems to be an effort. Her confident, purposeful stride is gone, replaced by a weary, shuffling gait. She is a ghost returning to her own tomb. The historical debate that this return journey brings to mind is one of agency and addiction. Was this scandalous double life something Messalina could control? Something she could dip in and out of at will? Or had she become addicted to the thrill, to the escape, to the secret identity of Lysa's scar? The ancient sources portray her as a woman driven by an insatiable lust, a classical interpretation of addiction. But modern historians often reframe this. Some see it as a form of sensation-seeking, a psychological trait where an individual requires constant, high-stakes stimulation to feel alive. In this view, her return to the palace is not a return to safety, but a temporary and unbearable, withdrawal from the only life that felt real to her. The question lingers, was she putting the mask back on to re-enter the palace, or had the mask of the Empress become the true disguise? They reach the small postern gate in the palace wall, the one hidden by ivy. The slave produces the key, and the lock groans open. They slip back inside, into the quiet, manicured world of the imperial residence. The contrast is jarring. The air here is clean, the ground is swept, the silence is pristine. It feels like a different planet. You watch as she makes her way through the sleeping palace, a phantom in the marble corridors. The first servants are beginning to stir, polishing floors and trimming lamps, but they keep their eyes down, their faces averted. They know better than to see things they are not supposed to see. Messalina finally reaches her own lavish bedchamber. She dismisses the slave with a weary wave of her hand. She pulls back the heavy, embroidered curtains of her bed, a bed of carved citrus wood and ivory inlay, draped with the finest Egyptian linen, and collapses into it. She pulls the silken sheets over her head, blocking out the morning light, blocking out the world. The Empress is home. The mask is back on, and as far as the official world is concerned, she has been here all along, sleeping the pure, untroubled sleep of a Roman matron. The sun rises higher, flooding the city of Rome with a brilliant, unforgiving light. The subway awakens with a groan, its narrow streets once again filling with the clatter of carts, the shouting of vendors, and the general, noisy business of urban life. The brothel where the contest took place has barred its doors for the day, a sleeping monster in the morning light. But the story of what happened within its walls is already awake, and beginning to spread. It doesn't travel through official channels, through heralds or posted decrees. It travels the way most news in Rome travels, through whispers. It starts with the men who were there, the bleary-eyed witnesses, who are now nursing their aching heads in the city's countless taverns and wine shops. You are in one such establishment, a smoky, low, silencing place not far from the forum. At a corner table, a sailor is holding court, his voice a low, conspiratorial rumble. "You will not believe the thing I saw last night," he begins, and instantly, the men around him lean in, their faces eager. "The she-wolf, Lysa's car. She challenged Scylla herself to a contest of endurance." As he tells the tale, you can hear it changing, growing. The details become more vivid, more extreme. The number of patrons swells with each retelling. Messalina's stamina becomes something supernatural, demonic. Scylla's defeat becomes more dramatic. The story is shedding its grubby, weary reality and is being polished into a shining, perfect legend. From the tavern, the story travels to the public baths. Here in the steamy, echoing chambers of the Claudium, senators and merchants relax, exchanging gossip as they sweat. A young nobleman, who perhaps was one of the slumming aristocrats at the brothel, shares the story with his companions, framing it as a deliciously scandalous joke. "They say a certain lady from the Palatine has a new and very peculiar hobby," he says with a wink, and the story takes on a new, political edge. It is no longer just a story about two prostitutes. It is a story about the shocking behavior of the ruling class. This oral transmission of news is a crucial, and often overlooked, part of the Roman world. In a society where the vast majority of the population was illiterate, news rumors and propaganda spread like a virus through conversation. The bathhouses, taverns, and barbershops were the nerve centers of this informal information network. A story told at a subway tavern in the morning could be the talk of the senatorial elite by the afternoon. And here we stumble upon a curious and quirky feature of Roman urban life, the public latrines. These were often elaborate, multi-seat affairs with running water beneath them. Far from being private, solitary places, they were highly social. People would sit and chat for long periods, conducting business and, of course, exchanging gossip. It's a strange thought, but it's entirely possible that the legend of Messalina's contest was refined and spread in the communal lavatories of the city. The historical debate that this process highlights is about the relationship between oral tradition and written history. The historians who eventually wrote down Messalina's story, men like Pliny, Tacitus, and Suetonius, were not working in a vacuum. They were collecting and curating these very same moral legends that were circulating through the city. So, is their work a reliable, factual account, or is it more like historical folklore, a written version of the most sensational gossip of the day? Many modern scholars argue for the latter. They suggest that the surviving histories are not a clear window into the past, but a reflection of the popular imagination, of the stories the Romans chose to tell themselves about their rulers. The written account is just the final, fossilized form of a story that was once fluid and live, and constantly changing. Back in the imperial palace, an eerie, impenetrable silence reigns. Messalina is, presumably, still sleeping off her ordeal. Claudius is likely in his study, oblivious, poring over his Etruscan histories. The official world of the court continues its stately, oblivious dance. But the other world, the world of the streets, is buzzing with her name. Or rather, with the name she chose for herself, Lysiska. The legend is taking root. The story of her hollow victory in the brothel is becoming a piece of popular culture, a whispered epic, a dirty joke, a cautionary tale. She wanted a reputation, and now she has one. But a story, once it is released into the world, is no longer yours to control. It belongs yours to control, and it will grow and change in ways she could never have possibly imagined. Weeks, then months pass. The story of the contest becomes a permanent fixture in the city's undercurrent of gossip, a benchmark against which all other scandals are measured. Within the marble confines of the palace, however, life appears to return to a semblance of normalcy. The Empress Messalina resumes her public duties, a serene and dignified figure at her husband's side. The mask is firmly in place, but something has shifted. The victory in the subura, as hollow and degrading as it was, seems to have unlocked something within her. It was a taste of a different kind of power, a raw, personal dominance that she could not find in the scripted ceremonies of the court. And it appears she has developed an appetite for it. The secret nocturnal escapes do not stop. You witness her behavior growing bolder, more reckless. The careful disguises of the past are sometimes discarded. She begins to bring her dangerous nightlife back to the palace itself. She and her chosen circle of young, dissolute aristocrats start holding their own private parties within the imperial residence, turning secluded garden villas and private apartments into replicas of the subura's taverns. The lines between her two worlds, which she once so carefully maintained, begin to blur. She is no longer just seeking anonymity and escape. She is now actively building a court of her own, a shadow government of pleasure and intrigue that exists in parallel to Claudius's formal, scholarly court. She uses these liaisons not just for personal gratification, but as a political tool. An affair with a rising senator could secure his loyalty. A night of shared debauchery with the commander of the Praetorian Guard could ensure his silence and complicity. It's during this period that she takes a lover who is different from the others. Not a fleeting partner in a contest, but a long-term, public secret partner. His name is Gaius Silius, and he is described as the most handsome man in Rome. He is a senator, intelligent, ambitious, and utterly captivated by her. Their affair is not a well-kept secret. It is an open secret, a brazen display that has the whole of Roman high society holding its breath. Messalina forces him to divorce his wife and devotes herself to him with a reckless, all-consuming passion. This leads to a fascinating and slightly morbid detail of Roman high society: the use of poison. While we often associate it with medieval intrigue, poisoning was a very Roman political tool. A substance called locusta, believed to be a potent preparation of arsenic, was infamous. There were professional poison arrests for hire. It's a grim reminder that in this world of smiles and polite greetings, the threat of a sudden, unexplained illness after a dinner party was very real. In her rise to power, was accused of eliminating several rivals through this silent, deadly method. The historical debate here centers on this very public affair with Silius. Was it, as the ancient sources suggest, a case of a woman so blinded by lust that she lost all sense of reason? Was it a grand romance, a woman willing to risk everything for the man she loved? Or was it her most audacious political move yet? Some historians argue that Messalina saw the aging and often ill Claudius as a fading power. By aligning herself with the young charismatic, and politically ambitious Silius. She was preparing for a future without her husband. Their affair was not just a romance, it was the formation of a new ruling partnership. She was planning a coup, intending to oust Claudius under rule, alongside Silius as regent for her son Britannicus. You watch as her recklessness reaches its peak. She begins to shower Silius with gifts, not just money and jewels, but property and heirlooms belonging to the imperial family. She has slaves, furniture, and even famous statues moved from the palace to Silius's private home. It is a brazen public transfer of imperial property, a symbolic and literal looting of the state for the benefit of her lover. The old wise heads in the Senate and among Claudius's staff watch this with growing terror. They see a train wreck happening in slow motion. The emperor himself, famously oblivious and absorbed in his own projects, seems to be the only person in Rome who doesn't know what is happening. Or as some whisper, perhaps he knows and is too afraid or too weary to confront her. The pattern is clear. The secret victory in the brothel was not a climax, it was a catalyst. It was the moment she realized she could break the rules and get away with it. It emboldened her, convincing her that she was untouchable. Each subsequent act of recklessness, each new transgression, is built upon the foundation of that one long, sordid night. She is addicted to the risk, and she keeps raising the stakes, waiting for someone to finally call her bluff. Ultimate gamble is just around the corner. The autumn of the year 48 AD arrives. The air in Rome grows cooler, and the grape harvest festival, the Vendemmia, fills the city with a sense of raucous, drunken celebration. It is a time when rules are relaxed, when the city lets its hair down, and Messalina decides to use this atmosphere of citywide revelry as the backdrop for her final, most audacious act. Emperor Claudius is not in Rome. He has traveled to the port city of Ostia, a day's journey away, to oversee the construction of a new harbor, a massive engineering project designed to secure the city's vital grain supply. The palace is, for all intents and purposes, hers. The cat is away. You are in the gardens of Gaius Silius's sprawling mansion. A party is underway, but it's not just another of their usual debauched gatherings. There is a strange, almost feverish formality to the proceedings. Guests are dressed in their finest clothes. There are musicians, elaborate floral arrangements, and even a priest officiating a ceremony. And then you see it, and you can barely believe your eyes. Messalina, the Empress of Rome, is standing beside Gaius Silius before the priest. She is dressed as a bride. They are going through a full, formal wedding ceremony. This is the act that strains credulity, the moment in her story that feels more like theatrical fiction than historical fact. The wife of the living emperor is publicly marrying another man in Rome, while her husband is just down the road. It is an act of such monumental, breathtaking insanity that it almost defies rational explanation. The historian Tacitus, our main source for this event, describes it with a tone of utter disbelief. He tells us that witnesses were present, that dowry contracts were signed, that sacrifices were made to the gods, and that the bride and groom spent the night together in the nuptial bed as husband and wife. This moment plunges us into a peculiar corner of Roman law and religion. A Roman marriage, a matrimonium, was a surprisingly informal affair by our standards. The key element was not a piece of paper, but the publicly stated intention, the consensus of the two parties to live together as husband and wife. There was no single, required state or religious ceremony. However, the rituals, the joining of hands, the sacrifice, the feast were powerful social and symbolic acts. By performing these rituals in public, Messalina and Silius were not just having an affair. They were declaring to the world that they were, in their own minds, husband and wife. The great, and still unresolved, historical debate is what on earth were they thinking? Was this, as Tacitus suggests, the ultimate act of a woman dazzled and crazed by the sheer scale of her own wickedness? Was it a drunken, festival-fueled piece of performance art? A mock wedding that was never intended to be taken seriously? Or was it the most serious political move of all? One compelling theory argues that this was a deliberate, calculated attempt to usurp the throne. According to this view, Messalina knew that Claudius's health was failing. By formally marrying Silius and adopting his children, she may have been attempting a complex legal maneuver to secure the succession not for her own son Britannicus, who was still just a child, but for a new, powerful family unit headed by Silius. It was a preemptive strike, a way of seizing power before Claudius died and other rival, like Claudius's ambitious niece Agrippina, could make their move. In this light, the wedding was not an act of passion, but an act of treason. You watched the ceremony unfold like a waking dream. The guests, a mix of Messalina's reckless friends and Silius's ambitious political allies, cheer and throw flowers. But underneath the forced gaiety, you can sense a deep, terrifying unease. Everyone here is a conspirator. Everyone here is a conspirator. Everyone here has just witnessed an act that could get them all executed. The wedding feast that follows is described as a wild, bacchanalian affair, a frantic, almost desperate celebration. Messalina, her hair bound and adorned with ivy like a Maenad, a follower of the wine god Bacchus, is said to have danced with a wild abandon. It's as if she is trying to outrun the consequences of her own actions, to lose herself in a final, glorious blaze of defiance. But the real world cannot be held at bay forever. While the party rages in Rome, a small, terrified group of Claudius's most loyal and powerful advisors, his freedmen, men like Narcissus and Pallas who effectively ran the empire for him, are racing down the road to Ostia. They have seen the wedding. They know that this is no longer a matter of marital infidelity. This is a direct challenge to the emperor's life and throne. They have to make Claudius see the truth before it is too late. The ultimate betrayal has been committed, and the slow, grinding wheels of imperial justice are about to start turning. The scene shifts abruptly. You are no longer in the ivy-draped gardens of a Roman party. You are in a stark, functional room in the port city of Ostia. Through a window you can see the masts of grain ships bobbing in the harbor. Emperor Claudius is here, looking over architectural plans with a group of engineers, his brow furrowed in concentration. He is in his element, a scholar managing a complex project, blissfully unaware of the drama unfolding back home. The door to the chamber bursts open. 3 men hurry in, their faces pale with a mixture of fear and grim determination. These are not senators. They are the true power behind the throne: Narcissus, his chief secretary Pallas, his financial controller and Claudius, his legal advisor. They are all former slaves, freedmen who have risen to positions of immense influence. They are intelligent, ruthless, and for the men who gave them their freedom and power. Narcissus, the boldest of the 3, steps forward. His voice is shaking, but his words are direct. "Caesar," he says, dispensing with the usual formalities. "Do you know who your wife is?" Claudius looks up, his expression one of mild, academic annoyance at being interrupted. "Of course I do," he stammers, slightly confused. "I am married to Messalina." "Messalina," Narcissus says, his voice dropping, "is married to Gaius Silius." The statement is so absurd, so impossible, that Claudius doesn't seem to comprehend it at first. He just stares at his chief secretary, a look of profound confusion on his face. He likely assumes it's some kind of joke, a line from a play. This is where the ancient historian Tacitus gives us a fascinating, almost comical, insight into the chaos of the moment. Claudius is so bewildered that he has to turn to the other officials in the room, military commanders and his own friends, and ask them, "Am I still emperor?" Is Silius a private citizen? He has to confirm his own status, his own reality, which has been so completely upended by this single piece of news. The freedmen don't give him time to process it. They understand that Messalina's power over him is immense. If she is given time to reach him, to speak to him, she might be able to explain it away, to charm her way out of it, as she has done so many times before. Their only chance is to control the narrative, to keep him isolated, and to force him to act immediately. They bombard him with details: the public ceremony, the signed contracts, the witnesses. They paint a picture of a full-blown coup d'etat. They tell him that Silius and Messalina are planning to march on Ostia and assassinate him. Whether this was true or just a calculated exaggeration to spur him into action is a question historians still debate. Was it a genuine plot, or did the freedmen, who had long hated Messalina and saw her as a rival for influence over the emperor, seize upon her reckless act as the perfect pretext to finally destroy her? Their own power was at stake. If Messalina and Silius took over, These freedmen would be the first to be purged. Their advice is a potent cocktail of loyal counsel and desperate self-preservation. And here we see a curious and very Roman reaction. Claudius's primary response is not heartbreak or rage. It is fear, sheer unadulterated terror. He is not a military man. His entire life has been spent avoiding confrontation. The thought of a violent coup, of assassins coming for him, reduces him to a trembling, indecisive wreck. His panic is so great that he can barely function. It is Narcissus who takes command. He bypasses the emperor and directly orders the Praetorian Guard cohort on duty in Ostia to secure Claudius and prepare for an immediate return to Rome. For a few crucial hours, the emperor's chief secretary is the de facto ruler of the Roman Empire. They bundle the terrified, stammering emperor into a carriage and begin the frantic journey back to the capital. The awful fury you might expect from a betrayed husband is entirely absent. In its place is the pathetic, whimpering fear of a man who has suddenly been made aware that the world he thought he knew was a complete illusion. He has been the cuckolded husband of a popular joke, the last person in the city to know the truth. The personal humiliation is profound, but it is the physical fear that paralyzes him. As the carriage rattles down the road towards Rome, Claudius, according to the sources, keeps plaintively asking a single question over and over again: am I still emperor? The foundations of his world have been shaken, and the scholar who felt more comfortable with the dead certainties of history is now facing a terrifyingly uncertain present. Word of the emperor's frantic return travels faster than his carriage. A messenger spurring his horse to another reaches Rome first. The news spreads through Silius's wedding party like a fire in a dry field. The music stops. The dancing freezes. The drunken laughter dies in people's throats. Panic erupts. Guests scramble to flee, to disassociate themselves from the scene of the crime, tearing the festive garlands from their hair as they run. Silius, his face ashen, knows the game is up. He makes a futile attempt to rally his supporters, but it's too late. The conspiracy, if it ever was one, evaporates in a wave of collective fear. He goes not to the Praetorian barracks to fight, but to the Forum, to try and resume his normal daily business. A desperate, pathetic attempt to pretend that nothing has happened. Wishing your present experience, Messalina's reaction is different. After a moment of stunned disbelief, her survival instincts kick in. Her first thought is not to flee, but to intercept Claudius, to see him, to plead her case. She still believes in the power she holds over him. She gathers her two small children, Octavia and Britannicus, and with only 3 companions, including one of the Vestal Virgins, she has managed to summon, she heads out onto the road to Ostia to meet her husband's procession. She is no longer the brazen empress or the defiant she-wolf. She is now playing her final role, the desperate, wronged wife and mother. She intends to present herself as a pathetic figure, with her innocent children as props, a spectacle of familial pity designed to melt the emperor's heart. The two parties meet on the road. It is a scene of high tragic drama. Claudius's carriage is surrounded by a bristling escort of Praetorian guards. Messalina, disheveled and weeping, stands in the middle of the road, holding her children's hands, begging to be heard. "Listen to the mother of Octavian Britannicus," she cries out. It is a moment of pure, raw confrontation. But Messalina has miscalculated. She is not facing her husband. She is facing Narcissus. The freedman, now seated in the carriage beside the trembling emperor, has taken complete control. He knows that if Claudius sees her, hears her voice, he might weaken. So he acts as a shield. He loudly begins to recount the whole sordid story of her affair with Silius, drowning out her pleas. He even hands Claudius a written document, a file detailing all her infidelities and crimes, to keep his eyes and mind occupied. The emperor is kept in a bubble of managed information, his gaze averted, his gaze averted, his gaze averted, his gaze filled with the narrative of her guilt. The carriage rolls past her. She is left standing in the dust, her final, desperate gamble a complete failure. She retreats not to the palace, but to a place of tragic irony, the gardens of Lucullus. These were among the most beautiful and famous pleasure gardens in Rome, a place of immense luxury that she had coveted. She had recently forced its owner, a man named Valerius Asiaticus, to kill himself on trumped-up charges, so she could seize the property. Now, this place she had acquired through murder and greed becomes her final prison. A peculiar historical detail is that these gardens were located on the Pincian Hill, and today they are the site of the famous Villa Borghese Gardens gallery in modern Rome. Standing there today, among the tourists and the art, you are standing on the very ground where Messalina met her end. Claudius, upon his return to the Praetorian camp, is met with cries for vengeance. The soldiers, whipped into a frenzy by Narcissus, demand the execution of Silius and all the conspirators. A swift, brutal purge begins. Silius is arrested and executed without a real trial. So are many of the guests from the wedding party. The debate among historians here is about Claudius's role in the final decision. Was he the cold, calculating judge finally exacting his revenge, or was he, as Tacitus portrays him, a passive, almost pathetic figure, manipulated by his freedmen to the very end? Tacitus tells a story of Claudius returning to the palace after the first wave of executions, having some wine, and then asking his servant to tell that poor woman, meaning Messalina, to come before him in the morning to plead her case. It suggests he was already softening, already willing to forgive. Narcissus hears this and knows he cannot let that happen. He realizes that a single night is all Messalina needs to win back her husband's affection and ensure the doom of all her enemies, himself included. He makes a final, ruthless decision. He takes a piece of paper, writes out an execution order for Messalina, and forges the emperor's seal. He then goes to a tribune of the Praetorian Guard and tells him he has a direct order from Caesar: go to the gardens of Lucullus and end it. Audacious act of insubordination, done, in his mind, to save the state and himself. A tribune and a handful of soldiers arrive at the gardens. They find Messalina on the floor, with her mother at her side. Her mother, who had been absent during her years of triumph, is with her in her final moments, urging her to take her own life with some dignity rather than wait for the executioner's sword. But Messalina's nerve fails her. She weeps, she bemoans her fate, unable to do it. And so, as the tribune grows impatient, he draws his sword and, with a single swift motion, brings the scandalous, turbulent, and short life of Valeria Messalina to an end. She is just 28 years old. The news of Messalina's death is brought to the palace. Claudius is at dinner. When the messenger delivers the report that his wife has been executed, the emperor shows no emotion. He does not ask how she died or who gave the final order. According to Tacitus, he simply asks for another cup of wine and continues with his meal. A reaction so devoid of feeling it is, in itself, terrifying. And so the woman is gone. But her story, the one she seemed so desperate to create, is just beginning. Now, it falls into the hands of the men who will write it down, the men who will shape her legacy for all time. You must now leave the smoky brothels and the tense palace corridors, and enter a different kind of room, the quiet, lamplit study of a Roman historian. Imagine a man like Tacitus writing some 60 years after the events. He is a senator, a member of the very class that Messalina and the powerful freedmen had so often terrorized and humiliated. He sits with his scrolls and his stylus, piecing together the narrative. He is not a neutral journalist in our modern sense. He is a moralist, a masterful prose stylist with a deeply pessimistic view of imperial power. The story of Messalina is not just a juicy piece of gossip, it is a perfect case study in the corrupting influence of absolute power and the depravity that can flourish when a weak ruler like Claudius is on the throne. His sources are not official court documents, which would have been heavily sanitized. His sources are the very rumors and legends you heard spreading through the city, the stories from the taverns, the whispers from the baths, the accounts of other senators who survived the reign. He is working from a pool of oral history that is already deeply biased, sensationalized, and shaped by political animosities. Then there is Pliny the Elder, the man who gave us the specific, quantifiable details of the contest with Sylla. He was an encyclopedist, a collector of facts and oddities. For him, the story of Messalina's marathon was a piece of extraordinary data, a record-breaking feat of human endurance, albeit a scandalous one. He presents it with the same detached curiosity he uses to describe a strange fissure or volcanic eruption. He is not judging her, he is simply cataloguing her as a phenomenon of the natural world. And let's not forget Suetonius, who wrote a generation after Tacitus. He was a biographer, a lover of scandalous anecdotes and personal details. He delights in the gossip, the bedroom stories, the shocking behavior. His portrait of Messalina is less a political analysis and more a collection of her greatest hits of depravity. Herein lies the great, unresolved debate that defines Messalina's legacy. Can we ever separate the historical woman from the literary character created by these men? For centuries, their version was the only one. Messalina was simply a monster, an nymphomaniac, a byword for female corruption. But in the last few decades, historians have started to push back, to read between the lines of these hostile male sources. This is the revisionist view. These scholars ask crucial questions. Is it plausible that the Empress could slip out of the palace so easily? Could she truly have conducted a public wedding without the Emperor knowing? They suggest that many of the stories are wild exaggerations, or even complete fabrications, part of a political smear campaign designed to justify her execution in the subsequent Damnatio Memoria, the official damnation of her memory, where her name was erased from public inscriptions and her statues were torn down. A particularly fascinating detail is that this damnation of memory was rarely completely successful. While the Senate could decree it, they couldn't control private sentiment. Archaeologists have found inscriptions where Messalina's name has been clearly chiseled out, but they have also found private statues and likenesses on cameos and coins that were preserved. It suggests that while the state condemned her, some people, for reasons we can only guess at, chose to remember her. The revisionist historians don't necessarily try to paint Messalina as a hero or a saint. Instead, they try to see her as a rational political actor in a brutal system. They argue that her scandalous affairs were actually the building of a political faction. Her thefts of property were the redistribution of wealth to her allies. Her final, fatal wedding to Silius was a calculated, if disastrous, attempt at a coup. In this reading, she was not a woman driven mad by lust, but a brilliant, ambitious politician who played the game of power, played it for the highest stakes, and ultimately lost. So, who was she? The sex-crazed monster of Tacitus and Suetonius? The record-breaking phenomenon of Pliny? Or the misunderstood political strategist of modern revisionists? The truth is, we are left with only the echoes and the ghosts. The real woman is buried under 2,000 years of storytelling, shaped and reshaped by men who all had their own agendas. We are like archaeologists, trying to reconstruct a complex human being from a few shattered, and very biased, fragments of text. And so, the dust settles. The bodies of the conspirators are disposed of, the blood is washed from the stones, and the Roman state, with its remarkable, ruthless resilience, moves on. Claudius, now a widower for the third time, is quickly persuaded to marry again. His choice is his niece, Agrippina the Younger, a woman whose ambition and political skill would make Messalina's efforts, look like child's play. Agrippina would eventually sideline Messalina's son, Britannicus, maneuver her own son, Nero, into the position of heir, and many historians believe, ultimately poison Claudius to finally secure the throne for her child. The cycle of palace intrigue simply found a new, more effective operator. But what of Messalina? Her name, despite the Senate's official efforts to erase it, did not disappear. In fact, the opposite happened. The very scandalousness of the stories, the sheer, epic scale of her alleged transgressions, ensured her immortality. She was too good a villain to be forgotten. You are standing now in the abstract space of legacy, a place where history melts into language. You can almost feel her name detaching from the historical person and becoming something else, a symbol, a word. For the next 2,000 years, Messalina would become a kind of shorthand, a universal synonym for a sexually insatiable, ruthlessly ambitious, and dangerously powerful woman. You see it in the writings of the Roman satirist Juvenal, who, writing a couple of generations later, sealed her image in a famous, venomous poem, describing the imperial whore with her still itching womb, sneaking out of the palace to work in a brothel, the last to leave, weary but not yet satisfied. This literary image, more than any historical account, is what would echo through the ages. You can trace the path of this echo. You see it in the Renaissance, where her story became a popular subject for cautionary paintings and moralizing plays. Artists depicted her as a beautiful but demonic figure, a classic temptress leading men to their doom. She was a Christian allegory in Roman costume. You see it again in the 18th and 19th centuries, where she became a figure of Gothic horror and romantic fascination. Operas were written about her. Sensationalist novels embellished her story, adding new layers of intrigue and depravity. She was the ultimate femme fatale, a creature of exotic, dangerous sensuality. This brings up a small, but telling detail about the transmission of her legend. The typefaces that occurred as manuscripts were copied and recopied by medieval monks. For a time her brothel alias Lysis Gush, She-Wolf was occasionally miscopied as Alice C. II or other variations, leading to some confusion in later texts. It's a reminder that history is not just shaped by grand narratives, but by the tiny, mundane errors of sleepy scribe. The final and most persistent historical debate is this: is it possible to ever reclaim the real woman from the overwhelming power of the myth? Every attempt to understand her is a battle against the towering caricature created by her enemies. She has become, as one historian aptly put it, a male fantasy of female evil. Her story has been used for centuries to warn against female sexuality, female ambition, and female political power. Feminist historians in the 20th and 21st centuries have made the most concerted effort to challenge this narrative. They don't ignore her ruthlessness or her crimes, but they insist on placing them in the context of her time. They argue that she was a woman trapped in an impossible position. She had the lineage and ambition of an emperor, but the legal and social constraints of a Roman wife. Her only paths to power were through the bedroom and back corridor intrigue. If a man had done what she did, use seduction to build alliances, ruthlessly eliminated rivals, and plotted to seize power, would he be remembered as a monster, or as a shrewd, if unsuccessful, political player? And so you are left here at the end of her short, brutal life, and at the beginning of her long, infamous afterlife. The woman who lived and died in the marble halls of Rome is gone, perhaps irretrievably. In her place is a legend, a story so powerful it has outlived the empire that created it. She chased a reputation in the dark, dirty corners of the city, and she found one. She won a hollow victory in a squalid contest, and that victory, in a strange, ironic twist of fate, granted her a kind of eternal life. Not the life she wanted, perhaps, but a life in story. A story that, even now whispered in the quiet of a room like this one, still has the power to shock, to fascinate, and to make us question where the woman ends and the monster begins. And so, the story of the Empress and her shadow life in the sub-URA comes to a gentle, quiet close. The echoes of the raucous brothel fade away, the sharp edges of politique begin to soften and blur. The frantic energy of that long Roman night has finally spent itself, leaving behind only a deep and profound stillness. You can almost feel the cool morning air of the Palatine Hill, the silence that follows a great and terrible storm. There is only the quiet. Let the details of the story begin to drift, like autumn leaves on a slow-moving stream. The names, the places, the impossible numbers on the abacus, they can all float away now. They are not important. What remains is just the feeling of a journey completed, a long path walked through the shadows of the past. You can feel the weight of your own body, safe and comfortable, a comforting anchor in the present moment. The cool stone floors of the palace, the rough cobblestones of the city, they are a world away. There is nothing left for you to do, nothing left to figure out. The story has been told, and now it rests. And as it rests, so can you. Allow your mind to drift on that slow, gentle current, carrying you away from the shores of Viciousness, towards the deep, peaceful waters of your unsleep. The final word has been whispered. If your mind is still gently stirring, you're welcome to drift into another of my stories. If not, I wish you a deep and peaceful slumber. Good night.